Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first webinar in Sustainable Conservation's Climate Resilience through Regeneration series. Thank you all for joining us today. I'd like to give many thanks to our sponsors, Environmental Science Associates, Holland and Knight, and Spotswood Estate Vineyard and Winery for supporting our Spring 2024 webinar series and sharing Sustainable Conservation's vision of stewarding our most precious natural resources for all Californians. My name is Joe Choperena, and I'm the Water Resources Project Director at Sustainable Conservation. For those of you who don't know us, Sustainable Conservation advances the collaborative stewardship of California's land, air, and water for the benefit of nature and people. Every day, we bring together business, landowners, scientists, government, water agencies, nonprofits, and others to advance collaborative solutions to steward the natural resources we all depend on in ways that are just and make economic sense. This webinar series will explore how sustainable conservation and our partners are adapting, innovating, and uniting to confront climate challenges head-on and build a stronger, more sustainable California. Over 3 webinars, we will explore actionable strategies for climate resilience, including soil health practices, ecosystem restoration, and groundwater recharge. I'm going to briefly give some background on sustainable conservation's work on recharge. Since 2011, we've worked on a lot of recharge that benefits aquifers at large. However, over the past few years, we've made an intentional effort to prioritize recharge that is targeted in areas to improve aquifer levels that benefit community drinking water and habitat, since these are 2 areas that can often be left out of conventional recharge strategies. We collaborate with various partners on multi-benefit recharge projects, and we are excited to highlight the great work that both of today's panelists are doing, which is what led us to inviting them to participate in this webinar. But before I introduce our panelists, we'd like to get to know our audience. We have a 3-part poll for you. Where are you joining from today? What describes your area of work? And how would you rate your level of knowledge on groundwater recharge? Please take the next minute or 2 to answer these poll questions. Looks like we're still getting a few more responses in. All right. So it looks like about a quarter of our attendees today are from the Bay Area, followed by about 15%, 16% from both the Sacramento Valley and San Joaquin Valleys, and the North Coast at about 12%, only 4% from the Central Coast, and Northern California inland about 9%. And then Southern California, about 7 and 6%, and about 6% out of state. And as far as participants' affiliation, we have about 36% from nonprofit, 22% from government, 19% from agriculture, and about 3 to 4% between business and foundations, and about 6% from water agencies, and 9% from other. And as far as level of knowledge on groundwater recharge, we have about 71% with average, 16% beginners, and about 13% expert. So pretty diverse group. And really interested to see that we have so many Bay Area attendees today, because normally it's pretty heavily dominated with San Joaquin Valley and Central Valley on most of the work that I do. All right. Well, thank you so much for answering those poll questions. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists. Abby Hart, who's the Agriculture Project Director in the Nature Conservancy's Water Program, and Aaron Fukuda, the General Manager at Tulare Irrigation District. Thank you both for joining us today. And with that, oh, sorry, go ahead, Abby.
I was just saying, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you guys so much. We'd love to hear a brief introduction by both of you. Abby, if you would like to start and give your intro.
I'm Abby Hart. I'm a project director in the California chapter of the Nature Conservancy, as Joe just said. And I've been working on Sigma-related issues since the inception of Sigma back, since I came to TNC in 2018. And a lot of my work focuses more on dry sorts of habitat that might be possible to restore under Sigma, but TNC also has interest in and has provided a lot of support and advising around especially wildlife friendly recharge. And so I'm here to talk more about that piece today.
And Sigma is the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which was passed in 2014 and is the focus of a lot of our work. So thank you so much, Abby. And Aaron, can you briefly introduce yourself?
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Sorry, we tripped in the afternoon. Happy to be here. My name's Aaron Fukuda. I'm the General Manager of Tulare Irrigation and the Interim General Manager of the Mid-Cahuilla Groundwater Sustainability Agency. I've been with the district now for about 18 years. I first started as the district engineer, which is when I came on board, we're a conjunctive use irrigation district. So it's well ingrained in us, the surface water, groundwater interaction story. But I think ever since I've been here, we've been looking for that next chapter, developing each chapter as we move along. And Sigma is definitely a game changer for all of us, which has kind of elevated our recharge game per se. And so we've added a whole new host of opportunities for our programs. And so I'm happy to share one of those, just one of the programs we're working on.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Aaron. We've been lucky enough to work with Aaron since I want to say 2015, 16. So you guys have been a great partner, and obviously TNC and Abby as well. So I'm going to go ahead and start by asking the first question to the panelists. I see that some of you are already using the chat. So please feel free to enter your questions into the chat, and I'll be sure to ask those as they come up. So the first question is for both panelists, both Abby and Aaron, and it's a broad question, but if you can please describe the multi-benefit recharge projects that you've been involved in, and please elaborate on the why of these efforts and how or if you're collaborating with or did collaborate with community members and organizations. And whoever wants to start first, feel free to. I'll leave it up to you guys.
Aaron, why don't you start first with the Okieville?
Darn it, I was going to say, who's faster to the mute button? But you were faster to the mute button. So I wanted to, again, we've been working on a lot of projects around groundwater recharge and the multi-benefit, layering the benefits to other uses in your area is just part of the next evolution of what we went to. Interestingly, the project that I want to talk about, the Okieville Recharge Basin, actually started kind of right around the Sigma window, but it wasn't designed specifically because we had a Sigma compliance requirement. And I'll explain a little bit about it. It's just intrinsically, we had synergies between everybody that had identified a problem and we're looking for a solution. So I'm going to throw up an image because luckily we are now, as of I think Monday, the project is online and starting to accrue its benefits to the underground system. So this is the Okieville groundwater recharge basin. And when we say multi-benefit, This was really designed for disadvantaged community water quantity and quality impact. As you can see, just down gradient of the community, up gradient of the community is the basin, and down gradient is Okieville there. I have to say, Okieville is a real name and a real place. We applied for a federal grant, and the federal government told us we needed to change the name. And the community said, nope, they identify themselves as Okieville, and we're going to keep it. So the community had started to see impacts in the first drought in 2014, and working with Self-Help Enterprises, which is a project partner. They were looking for some data in the area, and they were finding on the south end of the community that the water table was a little bit higher, and the quality there was no issues there. And so when they asked about that, I said, well, because we've got to reach another recharge basin down gradient, but the benefits only go up so high into the community. And so with that concept, we began working with Self-Help Enterprises and the Community Services District there about, well, maybe we can put a recharge basin up gradient, and then the recharge will connect over time. And so we started that project probably around 2015-16 time period. We did receive initial awards of FEMA grant. That took 3 years to get through the process, at which point they actually denied us that grant. So unfortunately, we kind of started over, and thankful to the Department of Water Resources, through their Sigma implementation grants, we received funding and were able to put the project on the schedule in 2022. Then we went through designs, permitting, and construction, and again, very short time frame, we have this up and running. Unfortunately, we missed the 2023 wet season, but we're happy to see it online this year. So the reason why we did it was really to layer those benefits for the community that had an impact. We did mainly, our focus was to on the irrigation district side, to get the project funding and the grant going, and Self-Help Enterprises was our bridge between the community and our irrigation district. We met with them to work out the details of the project. The irrigation district bought the property. We had engagement from the landowners in the area, to the point that's how we ended up with this property. This landowner was going to sell the property in the market, but he held the property because he felt that the project was a better fit for Okieville than it was to go into ag production. So he held the property for about 5 years for us. He had multiple offers on the property, and took our offer, which was, I think, not the lowest offer, but we weren't the highest offer for him. But he felt that it was better for the community than for to sell to another ag producer and put more trees or something else there. So that's our project. We hope to again accrue groundwater quantity and quality benefits to Okieville, and we're happy to see it online and recharging away today.
Thank you so much, Aaron. Quick question. So you said the construction of this dedicated recharge basin was not completed last year, where we had extreme amounts of flood releases and excess surface water. But I do see water in this photo, and you're mentioning that it's online today. Oh.
No, we literally wrapped up construction about 2 weeks ago on the main basin and the inlet, and then immediately opened this is water that flowed in as of Monday. And I think we took these pictures on Tuesday.
Okay.
Yesterday.
And we do have a question in the chat from Lynn, asking about how this system works. Aaron, can you explain that? If not, I can.
So the canal here is the Packwood Creek running along the side of the canal here, carries irrigation flows and flood flows during flood releases. There's a turnout here in the corner, and it's on SCADA control, so we can control it from our office. And essentially what we do is we turn water out into this basin, and it percolates into the ground. Groundwater is flowing towards Okieville. The Tulare Lake bottom is southwest of here, down in this area. And so water is naturally flowing that way. We intend to continue to put water supplies in here on a regular basis to build, I would call it a groundwater mound that is heading for Okieville. Okieville has just secured a new community well. So they will now have water feeding that community well underground. I hope that kind of helps answer the question. It's basically a big pond out there that turns water out and recharges.
Thank you, Aaron. And Lynn, please let us know if you have any follow-up questions of that. And before we head over to Abby, there is a question from our former colleague, Taylor Broadhead. Are there any plans to do water quality monitoring at Okieville? And
Yeah, I failed to mention that. That is actually a significant project component. Thanks, Taylor. You reminded me. We have a suite of monitoring wells down gradient that will be monitoring quantity and quality of water. That was one of the exciting parts about this grant is we initially wanted to put the recharge basin closer, but again, we couldn't find anybody that would sell to us for a reasonable price. This landowner was willing to give up. What we realized is giving ourselves a little bit of gap distance between the community and the recharge basin will allow us to monitor any potential water quality concerns. In talking with the community and self-help enterprises, we actually acknowledge that sometimes for water quality to get better, it has to get worse first. And so we're prepared to, set up water quality sampling, and then actually may have to do some treatment in the homes, RO systems, while we get the recharge basin cleaned up and the levels up underneath the community. So there are monitoring wells that are installed. They're not on, you can't see them here, but they're installed to monitor that for us.
thank you. And your mention of water quality potentially getting worse before it gets better in the context of recharge. If you could elaborate just a little bit on that too.
Yeah, generally speaking, in the Tulare Lake area in the Kauai subbasin, one of our major concerns is nitrates in the groundwater system. And those are, a lot of them are legacy issues that have been down there for decades. And so as you percolate good, this is Sierra snowmelt water with very little constituents of concerns. It's high quality water. You're putting high quality water in and can mobilize some of those nitrates. However, I know working with sustainable conservation, you guys have done great work in looking at that. How much water do you have to put in to overcome some of those water quality issues? And there's another question here, how long are you going to put it in and how frequently? The way we look at this recharge basin is different than our other recharge basins that only operate when we have flood flows. This basin will have water in it more frequently because we're trying to build that water supply up and avoid water quality concerns for Okieville. So you're going to see water in here more frequently, maybe not all the time year round. The way I liken it for folks who are trying to understand it is our board views the community of Okieville no different than our growers or anybody in our irrigation district. They're taxpayers, they live in our communities, they're our neighbors. So when we do the groundwater or the surface water allocations, their allocations will simply go into this recharge basin. The community is about 80 acres in size. If you allocate about 1.3 to 1.5 acre feet per acre, that's a little over 100 acre feet per year that we'll be putting into that basin.
Thank you, Aaron. Let's just go through a couple more questions since we've got plenty of time. There's a question about pre-treatment of water. If you can explain just kind of the percolation and treatment of surface applied water for recharge, Aaron?
Yeah, there's really no pre-treatment we're going through. I mean, we move debris and stuff like that, but generally speaking, this is Sierra snowmelt, so it's coming in low nitrates, no arsenics, no constituent of concerns. So we're not doing any pre-treatment. When it goes into the basin, there could be some the filtration that happens just due to the natural soil profile. Again, we have concerns with mobilizing potential nitrates. We've removed the surface profile, the topsoils. Hopefully that removes all pesticides and existing residue that was on there. But this site was lightly farmed prior to us taking it over. So again, we're trying to minimize all of that through this.
Thank you, Aaron. And you described the source of the water being Sierra snowmelt and surface water coming down from the mountains. There's a question here about the status of the water, whether it was federal, state, is this coming off of the Frying Kern Canal?
Yeah, we're the irrigation district is a pre-1914 water rights holder on the Kauai River system here in the Kauai subbasin. We also have a federal contract with the Bureau of Reclamation. So we blend the two supplies on a normal irrigation run. The specific water you see in here today is CVP federal water coming from Millerton Lake off the Frying Kern Canal. But later this summer, we'll be blending the two together. And so you really can't discriminate between what is federal. We don't have dyes in the water to say this is federal and it's all blended together.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Love all the questions. Please keep them coming. Even though we're going to hand it over to Abby now, we're still going to continue to talk about both projects throughout the duration of this webinar. So thank you so much, Aaron and Abby. If you could go ahead and describe your project.
Sure. So actually, the project that I'm going to talk about today is behind me, but I also have a few slides with a few more pictures. This is a recharge basin on part of a property called Caponero Creek, but it's not on the part of the property that I work on most often, which is dedicated to upland habitat. This is a little further north in the Pixley Irrigation District area in the Tulare subbasin. But I want to start back a few years ago, actually, after Sigma was passed, but before we really started thinking about land repurposing in the way that we are now with state funding and everything else, TNC, Audubon, and Pixley Irrigation District had a partnership to begin thinking in the really early days of Sigma what some land transition could look like there, and especially toward these land uses that are the multiple benefits are really related to habitat. So part of the reason why that happened is because there's existing habitat in the Tulare subbasin for both of these like habitat types, and it's an area where we could conceive about building out around those core areas to really like increase the total benefit, but also because it's an area that has really significant impacts from a groundwater sustainability perspective and like significant deficits that they're going to have to meet through various project types. And so one of the first projects that ended up coming online, I wanted to tell the story of like its history so that you could see one example of how land repurposing happens and how it can include things like recharge, like you see here, but it can include other land uses at the same time. So there was this large 10,000 acre dairy in the Tulare subbasin in that Pixley area. And that family decided to sell their dairy for, I would say like the normal sorts of reasons that families might consider selling a family business. The children were interested in farming that next generation and they were ready to pass it on. And it was purchased by an investor. This large investment firm happens to be a firm that TNC has a relationship with as a conservation advisor. And so when that investor purchased this large dairy, they had in mind to reconfigure the use of the entire 10,000 acres and were open to considering conservation uses for some of the portions of the property. And what they decided was that the northern portion was particularly well suited to recharge. And so we worked with them on how they could design that basin so that they would get this shallow and manage it for shallow flooding, which is especially what we want for migratory shorebirds. I know there are some Audubon folks on the call, and I am not really a bird person. So if I mess up on the bird stuff, I'm going to call on them to fill you all in on the truth. But I believe, like, I do understand that the shallow flooding is really what benefits shorebirds. And you can design these recharge basins to have all be shallowly flooded for shorebirds or to have variations in depth so that you can benefit everything from like waterfowl like ducks to these shorebirds that use more of like the shallow flooded areas. And then on the other portions of the dairy, they were repurposed to other land uses like upland habitat, and some are still in production today in agricultural production. Another portion was eventually purchased by the irrigation district. And then after the irrigation district was able to purchase and hold it, that gave a local land trust time to assemble public funding and buy the remaining piece that is now dedicated to upland habitat. And the irrigation district was able then to also compensate the land trust to not use any of the water associated with the property. The reason why I tell that whole story is really just to say that these kind of recharge projects are often happening in a mosaic or in a matrix of other land uses. And there are ways of it happening where everyone is making a completely rational choice for themselves that doesn't have to be this excruciatingly painful land transition that I think a lot of us are afraid of under Sigma. That there are ways that it can happen that make a lot of sense for each of the actors involved. And partnership is absolutely essential, that each actor is able to play to their strengths. That investor was able to make an investment decision that was profitable to them. The irrigation district was able to get the water benefit that they were looking for their members. And the land trust is able to protect this asset as a conservation interest for the basin. So I wanted to explain that story a little bit for you to hear that piece. I talked a little bit about the partnerships already. So this project, this actual recharge basin is not part of the multi-benefit land repurposing program, which is a state program that now can fund this sort of work. But it's a pilot in the area where we're doing some of this habitat work with Audubon and many other partners. And there are hopes of doing the same kind of recharge basins on another part of Caponero Creek, as well as around the Allensworth community and elsewhere in the basin. Maybe I'll just show a few other photos really quickly so you can see what this shallow flooding looks like.
And Abby, while you're pulling that up, we have a question from Gina Culfer, who which Aaron answered in relation to the Okieville Basin, but it's about if these basins can be managed as a wetland. And I think that could spur into you talking about your and TNC's management considerations and construction of the basin that you're showing now.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to touch on that. So you can see here that this basin is really just barely flooded, and we're managing it for depths of 1 to 6 inches, generally speaking. And let's see, here are some other cute little birds. Yeah, so we are managing it essentially as a wetland. I'll just leave these birds up for a little bit because they're cute while I talk about it. But when we're designing basins, what makes it suitable for being managed as a wetland is kind of interesting. So where an irrigation district may have land that percolates really quickly, they're thinking that would be a great dedicated recharge basin. That is going to sink water fast. I can put a ton of water in and it'll get in the ground quickly. Recharge basins managed for wildlife are often going to be placed on more moderately suitable recharge lands that actually recharge much more slowly, because you need the water to stay pooled on the surface for some period of time for it to provide any habitat for these species. So it's actually an option for areas that aren't the very best for recharge, but where landowners may have the option of like spreading that water out and keeping it nice and shallow for a while. Or they could design this sloping basin where there's always kind of like a pool, a deeper pool, and with more water in the basin, there will still always be some shallowly flooded areas available. The extent to which you incorporate other like restoration options, like plants that would be dependent on water either seasonally or annually, kind of depends how much money someone wants to invest in these basins, the specific habitat objectives that they have for the area. So those are all things to consider. But another really important piece of these wildlife-friendly recharge basins, if you're only managing them for migratory bird habitat, they may not have to have water in them that often. But if you're trying to manage them for truly for wetland species, like of plants and things, you need to have water in these basins in really a significant number of years. Like let's say out of 10, I wonder, I know Hirano was on this call, and I feel like we had to solve this problem for one of the grants that we wrote. I believe that we said a minimum of 3 out of 10 years was what we were looking for. And like, ideally, it's actually many more years than 3 out of 10 that these basins are having water, especially if you're going for something like a perennial wetland. So those are some things to keep in mind if you're managing for wetlands.
And you bring up a really good point, Abby, that even if a site isn't ideal and have really high recharge suitability and great infiltration, there still are the benefits of, on really wet years like last year, especially down in the region both you guys are talking about, flood risk reduction benefits, just kind of pulling off those flood releases onto whatever suitable lands, even if recharge is not extremely great for that particular site due to soils or deeper geology. So thank you so much, Jimmy.
Yeah.
We have a question here from Kia Rivers. If there were any initial water quality concerns using a dairy for recharge. To you, Abby.
Yeah, there are. So we had to do like pretty significant soil sampling. So one of the things, like the areas where the cows actually were are not being used for recharge at all. And then even the forage fields have a lot of historic nitrogen loading. Some amount of that we haven't been able to deal with. We did do like multiple years of cover cropping to strip as much nitrate out of at least the surface levels as we could. And then like part of the siting of the basin has to do with both geology and soil sampling. And I think it's kind of like Aaron mentioned the same thing. There is a degree to which we're accepting some, basically the risk of leaching some additional nitrate into that aquifer, knowing that if we can just keep flooding that basin, we will eventually be diluting it. But there's going to be this initial flush of nitrates that are coming out of the soil and going into the groundwater supply. And in this area, it's going to be hard to avoid that entirely. So it's just one of the trade-offs that we're making as we site basins.
Great, thank you. Abby, can you elaborate a little bit on the construction and management considerations that you provided and that TNC provided to for these basins, and then like future plans to develop more of these in Caponero Creek?
Yeah, in this case, TNC advised on like this particular basin, like we said, is managed for shallow flooding. So our advice on construction was pretty limited. Just put a berm up, and then they have like little mini checks between some cells that they manage to keep depths as consistent as possible and consistently shallow between those cells. So on the investment firm's part, they consider this like much more management intensive for the amount of water that they're actually recharging in this basin, but that is what it takes to keep it shallowly flooded, for the to keep the greatest acreage shallowly flooded. Part of the reason why they're putting in that effort to do it, just so you all know, is that they have built into that the fund that this property is a part of. It's like a sustainability focused fund, and so they get a an added benefit for generating habitat. And so they have a special interest in trying really hard to get as many acres of this managed that way as possible. Just wanted to be honest about that being the case. So if you don't have that kind of incentive, you might be fine having just a portion be shallowly flooded and letting the rest flood deeply, and you wouldn't have to invest quite as much intensive energy. The other recharge basins that are being planned at in the Tulare subbasin as part of our multi-benefit land repurposing program, Audubon is actually doing a lot of the heavy lifting on design for those and advising around those. We work together when we need to. But those include different types of designs. It may include islands, deeper berms, deeper areas. It's really property specific. We also work all together on getting the permits for these basins in place and understanding the process that a landowner has to go through with CDFW, with US Fish and Wildlife Service to complete those permits. And then with the irrigation districts, I find that each of the landowners or communities are kind of cutting, at this point, pretty unique and specific deals with their irrigation districts on what a leave behind might look like to benefit the basin, on how much they have the right to pump out, exactly whose water is getting recharged. So I find those elements to be all really variable between the basins, and there's not really a recipe that is consistent across the board yet.
Thank you. You bring up a really good point, which about the leave behind and incentives that is related to the question from Rogel Rogers, our agronomist, which Aaron has already answered in the chat. But I think that from our perspective, we've been working with Aaron Fukuda and Tulare ID for so long. We've really seen the progression of Tulare Irrigation District's on-farm recharge program. And I think all of this leads into kind of the preparedness and TID's ability to really change your guys's program each of the wet years, where, again, the most recent wet years were in 2011, long drought, 5-year drought to 2017, then 2019 and 2023. Aaron, I guess if you could talk a little bit about how TID really used those dry years to prepare and anticipate and be ready for the next wet year. And then it kind of gets into what Abby was mentioning about kind of leave behinds and how your credit system really kind of increased grower adoption and implementation of recharge.
So this goes for another 3 hours, right?
We'll cut you off.
Yeah, allocation systems are another whole world that I live in, which obviously we started our allocation system development in 2021. It was grower initiated because our growers acknowledged that the groundwater levels were declining way faster than they, it was unsustainable in their own minds. So I was tasked with putting an allocation system together. We sat down for about 6 months, went through like 13 iterations before we even said, here's something we can talk about. We have a groundwater allocation system that tracks and limits groundwater measured as evapotranspiration. That system was put in place live in 2022, along with an online tracking tool, so growers can kind of see what we call the bank account of water for them. So they get their allocation, their account goes up, and then every month that we're tracking ET, their account diminishes. And last year in 2023, we were coming off 2 dry years, and in November of 2022, weather forecasters were saying 50% greater chance of it being dry. So we were just, thinking another year worth of dire managing limited allocations and basically a lot of fallowing. And then it turned wet. Well, when we started our initial flood release, when we put the notice out to growers to take water, if they wanted it, instead of our typical, dozen, maybe 12 landowners that call to take water, we had, I think, 80 requests within 4 hours. And so we quickly realized that the tool did a job that we didn't even think it wasn't designed to do. It incentivized growers to put water out in their fields, or what we commonly call AgMar or on-farm recharge. So they, when they apply the water during the wintertime, if there's no ET, evapotranspiration of the water, which is the plant using the water or it evaporating, it accrues as a credit to the groundwater system. However, Abby's right. We don't, in groundwater, it's not a science, it's an art. And so you have to be prepared for the fringes of your painting to be, take account for that. And so we do not allow 100% of the application to be credited to the account. In the wintertime, I think we take a 10% leave behind. So if you put 100 acre feet into the ground through your meter, you're only going to get credit for 90 of it. That other 10 stays as a safety factor in the system. In the summertime, that number is even higher. It's 25%. So that system has transitioned from one of growers were accepting of it, I guess, and willing to go along with it, to now they're fully bought into it. They think it's the future. So the idea is the allocation system, we build up the water system, and then we don't have real big steep drop-offs coming into dry years. We moderate it, and then in wet years we go back up, and then we moderate, go up and moderate, not just go tank it right after a wet year. So we're happy to see the programs working. Still a lot of kinks to work out. We have a lot of issues to work through, but the growers are sitting right next to us and helping us work through those issues.
Thank you, Aaron. We have a question in our Q&A section from Marilee to Aaron. I think of water going through the soil as purifying, as we discussed earlier, but then she asks, if it gets contaminated, why not send the clean Sierra water via pipe to the aquifer and skip the soil? Does evaporation get to be a problem in the summer? So looking at more kind of engineered recharge systems like dry wells or ASR. If you can open up.
So we've looked, I miss him a lot. He was one of our growers because his name was Corky. So you can imagine what those conversations were like. He was a great guy, and he was in here every month talking to me about how he could help solve this problem. And what he wanted to do is exactly what Marilee was talking about, is direct injection. So you take it from the surface, put it down in the lower aquifers. Unfortunately, the state, and for very good reasons, it may be good quality merely from a perspective because you know it's going to go through the soil profile and cleanup. But essentially, it would be a lower quality when you inject it into the water. And Division of Drinking Water requires that water to be almost what we call Title 22 or drinking water quality standards. So think about having a wastewater or a water treatment plant just to inject it into the ground. You might as well just put the water treatment plant in and send it to the community. But our water supply isn't reliable enough to say, I have water supply available for a small community 24/7. Again, our irrigation district got zero supply in 2014 and 15, in 2021 and 2022. I say that, and we are looking at something we call VADO zone injection wells. We've talked with USDA. We're looking to put these in there maybe 50 feet, 35, 50 feet deep. So they're only in that VADO zone, the upper soil profile. But again, those we think recharge maybe 300 to 500 gallons per minute. So not a lot of percolation going on there. So you'd have to put in a lot of them. And then evaporation in the summer, we're an open ditch system, so it's part of the losses calculated in our system. A lot of systems are piped. Again, if you pipe your system, you don't get recharge. So it's just part of the living with the open ditch system.
Thank you, Aaron. We have another question here from Wes Miller, one of our other irrigation district partners with Turlock Irrigation District. And he's asking, in response to Rogel's question, is the on-farm recharge you mentioned direct or in lieu or a combination?
It's kind of a combination, Wes. It's very interesting you say that because if I showed you pictures and I have a slide, I should have put it up here. And I show it to everybody. Everybody's like, well, they're just irrigating. And I go, yeah, unfortunately, and I've talked a lot about this and got a lot of comments about it. But the state and a lot of folks over the last 50 years have really done a lot of disservice by vilifying flood irrigation. And now we're incentivizing it. We just won't call it flood irrigation. We call it on-farm. We call it AgMar, but it is flood irrigation. And our guys, we've had them keep their flood irrigation systems. So the most efficient TID farmer, and I know exactly who they are, have a drip system to drip in the summers and a flood system to flood in a year like a 2023. And generally what's happening in the months of January, February, March, and April, they're on-farm recharging, and then we transition into the irrigation window. So hope that helps, Wes.
And we have another question here about an example of just how everyone's learning on the fly. So Betsy Stapleton is asking about the ET tool that you use, Aaron, at Tulare ID, if it's open ET, and if there are any residual concerns about accuracy of the data.
Yeah, that's the multi-billion-dollar question, I guess, is why aren't you using open ET because it's free? I would say Land IQ is not, for those that are familiar with it, I'm shocked at what we get for the under $1 per acre fee that we pay. But the ET, I was given the task of implementing a tracking, monitoring, cutback system within 6 months. And so if you're going to take a regional scale of 100,000 acres to manage over and you need a tool, you can't do it with meters. There's no way you can put in meters out there that fast. So the Land IQ tool by default became the only thing we could look at to get something going quickly. And as I've learned over time, and the growers can appreciate it, it only tracks what's being removed from the water cycle system, right? So you're removing water molecules through evaporation or transpiration. The remainder of that water is in a cycle. It's either returning to the ground, it's in the sky, that sort of thing. So the growers are being held accountable for the water supply that they're utilizing or burning up. The rest of it's in the cycle and moving around. I have found the Land IQ tool to be very, very good. Accuracy, I don't think it's any less or any more accurate than a meter. We have meters out here that I've looked at, and remember, meters are only as good as they're installed and maintained. So that being said, you have your own inherent issues with the meters. That being said, our motto here is we're going to use Land IQ at the GSA level. You grower should put a meter on, and we encourage you to do it. And almost all of our growers are.
Can you just briefly describe, because I don't know if everyone on the call or the webinar realizes the satellite tools that you're describing, and then compare that to CIMIS and the meters that you're talking about, just briefly, hopefully.
Yeah, and that kind of highlights the difference between the OpenET versus the Land IQ system too. So they're both using satellite imagery to take a energy balance of the field, and then they're calculating the amount of water that's being evaporated and transpired through a satellite imagery. The difference between the models or the OpenET and Land IQ is Land IQ has calibration stations in your area. So we've got, I can't remember the number, all throughout various crops, various regions that actually have evapotranspiration sensors in the field. Like I know we've got them in walnuts and almonds and pistachios because those are high acreage commodities that are permanently planted. So he can calibrate against that field measurement and then close the gap between the days where it's cloudy, where you can't get a satellite imagery. On the OpenET system, it's taking an average of many different models to find the average, and we find, generally speaking, that overestimates the amount of evapotranspiration. So if I'm going to bill and charge and track a grower, and it's continually measuring higher, and again, how do you know it's measuring higher, right? So we took fields that we knew where we had a meter, and we tried to because again, a meter and ET are two different things. We had to back calculate out of a meter what the ET was. And we looked at those, they were generally between 7 and 14% higher across at the field level. When you take it at the regional, it's spot on. It hits the target perfect. But as we drive to the field, we see discrepancies. And again, if I'm off 14% on a year, that bill could be pretty high for that grower, right? And so we needed a little bit more accuracy at the field level. And so that's why we went with Land IQ.
Thank you, Aaron, for trying to describe a very complex system. And I do see Gopal's question in the chat, but I do have a question that I really want to ask the panelists. We're coming up on the last 10 minutes, and we'll definitely get to your question, Gopal. But I kind of wanted to talk about like scaling and like applicability of these projects to other areas, whether it's other disadvantaged communities in your region area, Aaron, or in other parts of the San Joaquin Valley, Central Valley in general, and also Abby to, other opportunities for upland habitat. And you've talked you've mentioned a little bit about multi-benefit land repurposing, and that could use another 3-hour webinar. But Abby, if you could kind of talk about other areas where you see upland habitat restorations projects and recharge being a component of that. And then we'll get to you, Aaron, about the disadvantaged community scaling.
Sure. Yeah. So I think, for me, like recharge and things like upland habitat that are like a no water use, land use are like two sides of the same coin. So we know that like supply enhancement won't meet all of our needs under Sigma, and that demand reduction has to happen. And there are relatively few land uses that use absolutely no water, and upland habitat, I guess, doesn't technically from an ET perspective use no water, but it uses very, very little water. It's the sort of native habitat of the region, at least the part that wasn't historically wetlands. And so there's potential for that kind of all across the San Joaquin Valley and a part that some of us now call like San Joaquin Desert. But where we're focused on trying to get that upland habitat in place is really around existing habitat areas, because for the species that, unlike these migratory birds that can fly from recharge basin to recharge basin, a lot of the species that use upland habitat do not move so easily through agriculture. Some of them do, like a kit fox will move through agriculture reasonably well, but others won't move nearly as well. So being close to other habitat is really important for getting those populations to grow. So that's why we started in the Tulare subbasin and have a focus there. And there are other parts of like Fresno, Kern, Kings County that have great potential for those habitat types. And then wildlife friendly recharge is really applicable like anywhere along the Pacific Flyway that we could use more bird habitat. If you talk to bird folks, we have such a scarcity of habitat for these birds that fly through California. So really anywhere in the Central Valley is a very welcome place to be putting those kind of wildlife friendly recharge basins.
Thank you, Abby. Aaron, can you talk about if you're aware of other communities in your region or other parts of the San Joaquin, Sacramento Valley where recharge could improve their drinking water resiliency?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think every community is looking at that drought resiliency portfolio. So interestingly for Okieville, again, they got a new community well. So they have the straw on the ground. They have a recharge basin that's going to put water into the cup for their to feed their straw. What we discovered is that if you stand next to their well, it was running 24/7. And so we know if that well goes down, bearing goes out, we know wells good enough, they will fail. Now we have 80 homes without water. So now we're working with them on another straw, a backup well tank. And so everybody's looking at resiliency, and these recharge basins kind of start that conversation. And I know there are other communities that are doing, I think there's down in Arvin and in other areas. Again, we didn't jump in and say this is a solution. We have this buffer to look at the water quality impacts. But we know we can put water in the ground. We've been doing it for over 100 years. When you put a basin in, you put water in the ground, you do it consistently, you start to see the mound grows. It takes time, right? So it'll take us about 5 to 10 years worth of consistent recharge to start seeing the benefits under that community.
Yeah, and just to mention, we are working on a disadvantaged community groundwater resiliency project in Madera County. It's a little more complicated than Okieville because it's in a non-district area. It's just north of Madera Irrigation District and just south of Chowchilla Water District. So unfortunately, there's no conveyance and the necessary water rights, but those are hurdles, but not deal breakers. So thank you so much, Aaron. And we've only got 5 minutes left. Gopal Penny with Environmental Defense Fund is asking, can you talk about the limits to recharge in TID, which is also applicable in Cabanero Creek? Is land or land with sufficient recharge capacity, cost, conveyance, or not enough water? So what is the limiting factor to recharge?
All of the above, I think. But for us, at least in Tulare, we're looking at sustainability. And interestingly, what I run into 9 times out of 10 is finding the funding to do it is difficult. And then if you find the funding, the permitting hurdles are just tremendous. It's like, and I know every agency has their responsibility, but it's almost like, they're almost insurmountable roadblocks because a lot of people just don't want to do it or they give up. I'm pretty persistent on projects like this, but what we found is that if our allocation system there used to be one recharge agent in TID. It was TID. We had the projects, we had the basins, we had this. And now we have 201. So we have about 200 account holders in our district. And so now we have everybody participating in the program. That had returns on investment. It's like, a couple bucks to put the program together. I mean, in the bigger scheme of things, our recharge basins are costing us upwards of $40,000 per acre. A significant portion of that, which I know we have to do, but is the permitting that thousands and thousands of dollars. It often takes us about 1.5 years to get through our CEQA. If we throw NEPA in there, that could even bottleneck things. So Gopal, it's a good question. I say for us, it's all of the above.
And I'm seeing a question here in the Q&A from Max Dugan. Please correct me if I'm wrong, Aaron. He's asking about vadose zone injection and that it would still require registration through EPA Class 5 injection well program.
So we were working with a company that does these. Essentially, they're like stormwater, and they use them throughout Arizona. They use them in Southern California. So it's a ministerial well permit through the county, is my understanding. We have not done one yet, specifically because we've been managing from drought to wet years. And so on the priority list of things to get done, things like Okieville Basin have risen to the top, but it's in the project list hopper. We just haven't gotten to that type of detail, Max. But I appreciate you actually bringing that up, because I'll have to dig into that a little bit more.
And then we have another question from Marilee, and then I'm going to need to read the closing remarks. But is the recharge field or the dedicated basin to Okieville just a drop in the bucket to the community, or will it be close to balanced supply and use?
Oh, no, it's not just a drop in the bucket. That 20 acres, again, if we just put what we think the community, that's 100 acre feet of water supply that's going to be put in every year for that community. So try and visualize 100 acre feet, take a football field 1 foot deep, 100 feet deep, right? That's a lot of water sliding about a quarter mile away. So if you think about that block of water heading their way, that's a pretty significant amount of water supply. Whereas the Vado zone injection, you're talking gallons per minute. It's going to be tough to put that into the ground.
Are there any final comments or things that Abby or Aaron, you guys would like to state?
I just want to thank Sustainable Conservation for working with you guys over the last 10 to 12 years. When we get on calls, we start getting the ideas flowing, and then the ideas end up on paper. And so a lot of things we discussed with Joe and Daniel Mountjoy and others are hitting reality right now, and we're reaping the benefits. I applaud TNC and the Caponero Creek and those things, because when you talk about scaling up, those projects that hit the ground we are now looking at those projects in our region. So it's kind of like it's going to spread, I think, here in the near future.
Yeah, thank you everyone for having me and for getting to talk a little bit about the habitat potential on some of these recharge basins. It's always great to have the chance to talk about it and to hear what other folks are doing, like Aaron, and to be able to share with Suscon too. He's a great partner.
Thank you, Abby. I mean, it's amazing that you guys started Caponero Creek before MLRP and just the trends. And I often use you guys as a reference on how things can be done in all of these other basins that we're working on with land repurposing. So I just want to say the next webinar in this series will be May 15th, and we'll focus on the water and climate benefits of soil health. The registration page will be up soon, so stay tuned for the announcement via email or on Sustainable Conservation social media. Also, if you'd like to follow our work, please find us on social media, subscribe to our email list, or consider a donation. These webinars and our program work are fueled by the generous contributions of organizations and individuals like you. All new and increased donations are currently being matched dollar for dollar, so please consider donating by visiting suscon.org/give or by scanning the QR code on the screen right now. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you again in May. Have a great day. And again, thank you so much, Abby and Aaron. You guys were great.